Welcome to Crumbs Under the Table with me, Kristen Forster. Turned this on a slightly different location today. I figured you're getting bored of the same scenery. Of course, it's all trees and sky, but different trees and sky. You can tell by the shape of the clouds. I was going to say the events of yesterday, which is where the first day of Boris Johnson's actual government, and his first vote he lost, and so Parliament has wrested control of the agenda from the government. He also lost his majority on the same day, and of course, as I'm sitting here, I'm sure lots of people watching are saying, fantastic, isn't that good? But the whole thing kind of reminded me, so I went back and kind of just checked it out. Actually, it was on the day that he got elected as Prime Minister by the Conservative Party, and people say, oh, it's only a small number. Yep, it's true, but that is the kind of the way our system works. There have been plenty of others, like Gordon Brown, John Major, who have come into power in exactly the same way. So that's not really a big deal. But on that day, I did it. It was the hottest day of the year, and I spoke out of Proverbs 8, verse 2, where it says, a land in rebellion has many rulers, and it wasn't a kind of a diatribe against Boris. It was an observation of where I felt we were heading, and so I had a quick look back on it, and I thought, I'm going to re-mention it this morning. So if you can go and find it on YouTube. A land in rebellion has many leaders. Proverbs 28, verse 2. Because I still think a lot of what I was trying to drive at there, which is kind of how as sin kind of as sin grows, people become ungovernable, and I think what we saw yesterday was another example of that. It doesn't matter which side of things you're on. The thing that you kind of hear when you see the political commentators from the news kind of saying is there any way through this? And it's a problem we're going to see increasingly in the West, because at the heart of it, it's not a procedural problem. It's not even the problem, if you like, of bad people. Although, depending on which side of the debate, you can point fingers very easily and say these people are bad. I mentioned that yesterday. Watching the kind of early morning, the extreme of kind of referring to removal at gunpoint, which of course is a total exaggeration. But that kind of judgment that kind of comes into our language when emotions get stirred up. But in many ways, when emotions get stirred up, the real us comes out. And so what it's kind of showing, if you like, is something that we should, if we have any integrity as believers, take a step back from and have a look at. And I'm not saying that and saying be as righteous as me. What I'm saying, because actually that kind of thing just doesn't work, is as soon as we do it that way, we're just not ignoring. We're ignoring what we might see in the first place. We have to kind of come with far greater kind of honesty than that. But there is I did find myself very disturbed yesterday. I've been feeling it for a while anyway. I said even yesterday as we were kind of walking and saying, the good news is for me, my peace, my security, my foundations are in Jesus, rather than in political systems. But there are things I think that we should respond to it in, but not in terms of I'm going to make this agenda happen, but actually to ask the question and to do something counterintuitive, to do something in a different spirit. And so I was just kind of, I was thinking through this whole the whole issue. I've just realised I'm going to walk back this way, because my original plan was to walk up the side of the street, and that was it. So I'm going to go back there. Where we're getting to, I came back onto Facebook. I came off Facebook because I found it so depressing, how often I saw things that interesting. And I want to speak really carefully, because I'm going to talk about not rushing to judgment. So I don't want to speak as if I'm speaking with judgment, but we are also called to be discerning, just not judging. And we don't try and convict. We can observe and we can say, I think I understand what's going on, but I'm not going to sit there and be absolute about that and throw those kind of absolutist words around. And actually that's often part of the problem. But as I came off Facebook because of seeing I found it quite almost upsetting how quick people were to assume that everyone would agree with a judgment that they had made on someone or on a situation. And perhaps in my naivety I thought, if I go away perhaps they'll get better. Of course they don't. Things don't. Sorry, I'm laughing. I do sound incredibly arrogant, don't I? So I do apologise, but one of the things I'm very real about is we all have to have an opinion. So it's to have an opinion is not being pompous. It's actually being a real individual. It's just how we hold that, and how we kind of project and how we deal with it. So in this kind of context, I just wanted to flag. So I've seen people on both sides, those that are currently campaigning to take control out of the government's hands, to stop a no-deal Brexit, or which probably it looks, I suspect, although I'll probably get told I'm being too categorical here, but I suspect is much more to do with stopping any kind of Brexit than a no-deal Brexit. And then those on the other hand who are going to push through regardless of procedure and regardless of pain, and regardless of anything else, to achieve what they want to achieve. And I see Christians, friends who I would have thought of with huge kind of levels of maturity, so easily getting drawn in to the sort of the judgmental match between two extremes, and not even aware that there might be a different perspective to the one that they hold, that it has any righteousness to it, and it kind of worries me. And of course, as I say, I do it in a sense where, of course, I could be wrong. That's why I'm not mentioning any names. That would be unkind anyway. But it's just it's symptomatic of something you just generally see. And at the heart of it, there is something deeply, profoundly theologically important that we need to grab hold of, which is it is the trying to think of sorry, good. I'm walking because it feels like this is that's always the way when you're dealing in spiritual warfare, and Jesus understood that, which is why he teaches so regularly. Don't repay evil with evil. Don't resist the evil one. Why not? Why don't you resist the evil one? Surely that's evil in itself. Surely for evil to flourish, good men do nothing. All of these kind of quotes. We need to kind of get at the heart of what Jesus is driving at. Don't resist it. And sometimes you find the manuscripts add evil with evil, but it's about, very often the battle is not the thing that's right or wrong. And most of human history has had nothing like the European Union to ever be a part of. And when it was invented, it wasn't heaven on earth, so it doesn't mean that there aren't better systems as well. So to kind of make that our absolute is ridiculous. Let's just say hi, good morning to these people as we go past. Good morning. Hello. So we're in a transition of there's been a union for 60-something years, hasn't it? Is it as long as that, since the war? You can correct me, I'm not claiming to be an expert on these things. There was a Roman Empire for 1,000 years. There was an Egyptian Empire for 4,000 years. The Assyrians lasted a couple of hundred years, or 100 years. These things come and go. Political systems. They're not heaven on earth. We live within them. But in that context, we will always find that human systems, in the end, always resort to power is answerable to nothing but itself. And actually, at the heart of that argument, you find runs right the way through Scripture, right from the beginning of the Old Testament through to the New. It's part of the logic of the Book of Job, where, if you like, the challenge of the devil, or the challenge of Satan in the courtrooms of God, is Job only loves you because you do what's good for him. But if you like, the background challenge, the real challenge, is, of course, if you don't listen to my opinion, then actually you're proving the point that power is answerable to nothing but itself. But actually in that, what we see is that God is answerable to things within himself. It doesn't mean that there's a standard outside of God that God is answerable to, but actually God's uncreated nature defines a standard, and God's existential nature actually lives up to that standard. And so he answers to, if you like, a standard that his own uncreated nature defines in the first place. And so he doesn't just say, you know, I'm bigger than you, so kick you in the teeth and get out. Actually, what we see in the working out with Job's story is that there is a different way. There is a way in which power can cede something of itself, that power can hand over control without actually diminishing the authority of it. If I can, I know I'm probably, for a dog morning walk, I'm doing this without much kind of pre-planning and so on to find the right words. And so actually very often the challenge is when something evil comes along is the way in which we respond to it. 9 times out of 10 we inadvertently get drawn in on the terms in which evil sets. And I think you can see in many ways that is kind of, and then the response to then what we do is now responding in kind of kind. And so we then look at that and kind of feel pompous and we respond in greater detail. But all the time between the two, as we bounce from one side to another, what we're always doing is expressing that there is nothing more important than who's got power and who holds the power. And the one who holds the power can impose their view of right. And yet at the same time we live in a secular world that doesn't really believe in any source of absolute authority. As a believer, I do believe in a source of that, but I'm just saying in the secular world it won't acknowledge that. And so we have a weird situation where the perspective of the individual is seen as being whoever's got the most power can impose it, and whatever gets imposed in the end is right. And we can say, well, it actually draws from the people, but we can always make an argument that says, well, people didn't fully understand, or people were lied to, or people are actually with us and nobody wanted this situation even though we've not voted on it. We can always kind of create those arguments, but in the end what we're finding, what we're seeing going on at the moment in UK politics is bouncing backwards and forwards, which is less and less, although it uses the language, both sides use the language of morality, because morality is incredibly important to us as a concept as human beings, just not in practice. That sounds very cynical when I say that. It's 100% true that we love morality in other people. And we make excuses for our lack of morality, and we tell ourselves that we are moral, and we self-deceive ourselves and pretend that we are all of the time. And so we kind of we see that kind of going on. So the language on both sides is, it's a people's vote. Well, what was the last one? That the majority voted leave. Well, how did they vote leave? It's always an argument. We don't kind of question the fact that something or other ought to apply to everybody. We pretend it does, but in practice what it comes down to is who can wrest the most power. So Boris Johnson prorogues Parliament in what is a kind of procedurally correct but politically cynical move. So in response and in kind, those on the other side say, right, we're going to find procedures and we're going to break precedent by conversations with the Speaker and get something on the table. And we're just kind of watching, if you like, the dissolving of things that grew up out of a Christian ethos where something different was put into the mix. And this is the thing I suppose I just want to kind of say for everyone who's watching to this. I challenge myself with it regularly in these kind of situations, because the truth is I get an emotional response. I think I've said before in these things, I remember voting when the thing came, and just for the record, so I decided, I went along, weighed up things, voted kind of on balance, I'd rather leave, but I was quite happy in the next morning if people had voted Remain and so on. But of course what then happens is you respond to the things that are said against you. So I found it, just being really blunt, I found it deeply hurtful that people I knew were basically calling me racist and stupid. And so in my emotional response to that, I found myself getting more hardened in my view, as you can see. So I'm just kind of being the honest one here and telling what's going on. So I get more honest in my view because good people are now telling me that I did what I did because I was either racist or stupid. And they say, no, I didn't mean that about you. Well, yeah, but it's still getting getting said, and so we get hardened. So I have to step back from that and say, actually, what is the mind of Christ? Paul says we all have the mind of Christ. And yet at the same time, that doesn't mean we all think the right things, and the Bible is quite clear about that. We often don't think the right things, even though we can have the mind of Christ. We can rest into it and find something different. And that's a challenge which we can all do, and it's a very simple one, almost day by day, is we recognise, if you like, who I am in the flesh, And actually that's not invalid and it's not bad to do. But at the same time I recognise I need to rest into, lean into and get the mind of Christ. And get his perspective. And see things in his way. And the thing I would really want to drive on is if we are looking at what's going on objectively, we should all be disturbed. Because we are losing the idea that anything should moderate power except more power. And that is the pagan world. Is one of the things that came out very clearly in the documentary I was watching on Rome the other day by Simon Sebag Montefiore. I always think that's such a great name. You know he didn't go to a comprehensive school with a name like that, don't you? Which was just kind of highlighting that really, that the whole threat you see of Christendom, which is why 8 out of 10 people who are persecuted and murdered for religious reasons are Christians in the world today. Because actually at the end of the day, Christianity doesn't always comply with the idea of power is not answerable to anything other than more power, but the way it resists is very often the way of the cross, which is it lets power have its way with it. It understands that, and therefore it doesn't seem to be kind of aggressive and fight back, and we think, well, that's just becoming passive and we're doing nothing and evil is flourishing. But actually that is the way in which God proves Satan wrong time and time again. Which is he doesn't do it not by might, not by power, but by his spirit. What spirit are you of? Are you of the spirit that wants to call down judgment, smash up those cities that didn't receive us? And sadly, what you're seeing in the kind of culture wars that are emerging in the West, because as I was saying in the morning blog that I did on a land in rebellion has many rulers. And we're seeing right the way across the secular Western world, a world that was birthed out of if you like, the influence of Christianity. So we call that Christendom, the influence of Christianity. It was birthed in an environment like that, and an environment like that was able to sustain, if you like, the kind of the balance and the acceptance of other perspectives, and it was able to respond to them in ways that didn't kind of come in on the terms of, well, we're going to find a bigger power and smash your bigger power. And it actually creates an environment where dialogue has value, because dialogue really is dialogue. It's not just talking at each other. For dialogue to be dialogue, you have to be listening to the other person in a way where you're willing to be changed by them. And all of that kind of levels of security are not easy to come by. And it is part of the unique Judeo-Christian heritage that it is cultures that embody an understanding of the God of Scripture, a God who actually accommodates us by allowing us to set an agenda that is not his, as we were thinking the other day. And as we make that our ideal, if we make our God look like that, if our God looks like Jesus, then while it can have authority, it doesn't call down a legion of angels to smash up those who disagree with it. We're going to fight this battle 1,000 times in the coming years. It's not all disappearing when whatever happens in the next few months with Brexit happens. But I think it is kind of going back to this spiritual root. That, as I was saying on that land in rebellion talk, the land in rebellion has got many rulers, because in the end everybody answers to nobody except themselves. And so actually, if you like, when I did that, I talked a lot about kind of rules of community, but actually community has to involve diversity. I realised when I watched back on it, I didn't kind of make that point clearly. God created man, so he's an individual. Male and female, he created them, so they're a community. And a community that, because they're male and female, has the ability to multiply, be fruitful and multiply, so it makes more. But at the heart of that community is diversity. There's a male and there is a female. And they think differently. Oh no, I'll probably get told off for that. That's just a social construct, except it isn't. Except there are over 2,000 measurements you can make in the brain, just of brain structures, which are different within the average man and the average woman. Now, on an individual man or individual woman, a man may look a bit more like the average female, etc., etc. But there is, somehow we get wired differently according to our sex. So there are differences of thought, difference of the priority. There's a greater set of connections between the right and left hemispheres of the brain in the female and the average female brain, which is why women are better at multitasking stuff. If you like, the lack of connection in the male brain allows them sometimes to be better at focus work where they shut out the rest of the world and ignore what's going on around it. So, you know, there's all these kind of little balances and so on, which is not about being ultimately better or worse, it's just different. And that's at the heart of good community, is those differences of view and differences of perspective, but that only really works where you have a maturity that is able to hear all of those things and genuinely dialogue. Morning.
Morning.
Once we lose that ability, then we're all just isolated with our individualised way of thinking, and we're all kind of so unique and we answer to nobody else. And so I recognise I have my biases, and because I recognise my biases, I need to be proactive in leaning into the Lord to get the mind of Christ. And one of the best things, as has been discovered, is that those who genuinely are the most moral are the ones who are willing to talk about their flaws. So there you go. Oh, I'm doing well, aren't I? But I also think that the reason I wanted to mention that is because how profound it is that Scripture actually says the same thing. If you stop and think about it, you know, in 1 John, it says, if you go around saying you haven't got sin, well, you're deceiving yourself and there's no truth in you. Well, that's a sin. If you're deceiving someone, then you're lying. So that's a sin. So in other words, the people who go around talking the most about not having any sin, we know that they're not telling the truth, because straight away they're deceiving themselves. And that's actually one of the findings of modern modern psychology, is that strangely the people who have the most moral integrity are often the ones that talk most about their failures and are willing and happy and comfortable in doing that. The ones that make the biggest show of their own righteousness are actually very often, well, not very often, the ones that do talk like that almost always don't actually live up to it in the inside, and they actually very often are deceiving themselves. They talk themselves into a position where they don't realise that they cheat the tax man, they do all sorts of other things, they tell slight untruths but without using untrue words, all these kind of little things they do. And strangely, it seems that the process of talking a lot about morality and what people should do is part of them convincing themselves of the fact that that's who they are, as it turns out. And I think that's all preempted in that little verse in 1 John. I love it when you find New Testament wisdom, pastoral wisdom embodies so much truth that we've only just kind of discovering by the process of psychological research. So what am I driving at, really? What I'm driving at is in the months and the years to come, this isn't the only debate we're going to find it's going to go this way. The world is buying more, it's abandoned its Christian roots, which says that actually real power, the power that we aspire to, the ultimate power of the universe, gives space for other authority, for other powers, and actually its authority and its power is really seen in its ability to do that. The fact that it allows itself to be hurt by the power in other people, because it's better to acknowledge the value of that other source and that other base than it is just to say I'm the biggest and I'm the best, because that always isolates. The two are kind of a symbiotic thing. The more isolated we get, the more prone we are to just exert power. The more we exert power, the more we end up as every individual becomes a power and authority to themselves. And so we have to leaven society, and leaven is really frustrating. You know, it's so much more tempting to say, if I just had a big enough gun, I could make it all right. I would go in there and I'd knock heads together and I'd smack a few people around and say, get on and talk about it and be nice to each other, while I'm not nice to them. So we have to do it differently. We really do. We really do. So my encouragement is think sometimes before you post too fast your opinions on Facebook. If you're going to post your opinions, that's fine to have them, but do them with the kind of the humility that does say, I recognise that I am not the ultimate authority for morality in this situation. I'm not going to talk about it now. I am amazed how many people post things that if you stood back a few steps from them and looked at what they're saying, they're really saying, God might think of it this way, but I know God's wrong. No, they'd never say it like that, but actually if you stand back a little bit, you can see that's the trajectory that their comments are on. You know, Steve Chalks, I remember saying a story once about how he preached on Jesus turning water into wine, and he used the phrase, "the party's on me," and got told off by the deacon of his church. And he responded by saying, "Well, it's not my fault, it's what it says in it's what Jesus said." And apparently the deacon responded to him and says, "I know that, and I don't think the better of Jesus for it." But actually that attitude, which is, I see the world my way, and God must conform with my way of thinking, because if he doesn't, he's not really good, therefore I wouldn't be able to follow him. So really what we're doing in that way is we're putting ourselves at a place, and Paul talks about people. If you look at someone and say they're going down, so just to be really provocative, if you look at Boris Johnson and say he's a thug that drives people out of number 10 with a gun, well, that judgment is bringing Jesus down. Why is it bringing Jesus down? Because Jesus had to ascend to sit in judgment over us. Jesus will judge the nations, but he does so from the ascended place, from a place of seatedness. So actually when we can do it from the earth, we're saying, I'm better than Jesus, because with my feet on the ground and with my perspective, I know the truth. So our judgment is bringing Jesus down. Or if we say of somebody, they're going up, you know, they're going up. Well, he does it, I've got it the wrong way around, but he talks about situations where we're saying that's bringing Jesus down. Others doesn't mean that Jesus didn't go deep enough. So if we say that person is going down, it's kind of as if saying that Jesus didn't go deep enough into hell to be able to rescue them from that point. You see that nobody is irredeemable from our perspective. That's Jesus' judgment. And so we don't want to perpetuate by drawing in, even when we see something looks evil, our way of dealing with it has to be different. It has to be different. My worry in many ways is that you see a lot in the church will be drawn in without thinking. And so we need voices to remind people that our way of doing things is different. Our way of doing things is very, very, very different. Well, it should be. So I felt a bit preachy this morning, which is not my usual style. But it does feel, you know, as I said, it's not wrong. It's wrong to do absolutely nothing. It's just how do we respond? You know, and we can use the word passivity in both a positive and negative sense in these ways. Passivity can be an abdication, or it can actually be a kind of proactive pacifism, by which I mean we are agents of peace. That those who are the peacemakers are called sons of God. And being son of God is the beginning to kind of step into your heirhood, to receive the things that have been appointed for you. So I need to be a peacemaker. A peacemaker, a peacemaker, a peacemaker. Before I'm a mudslinger. So anyway, there you go. Thoughts for the day. It'll be interesting. See, this is now that distracted me. It'll be interesting to see how things play out. Because I do think that our problem is much, much deeper than the current process. It is that the West has accelerated not just an abandonment of its Christian roots, but an active cutting them off, and actually now saying they were evil roots and we don't want them. And so I expect there to be far more of what we're experiencing now, not just in the UK, but in the countries of Europe, in the US, all of those places that took things for granted, which were actually a gift of the Spirit. The stability that we had with a government that could talk. Parliament means to talk across. We've got the parley in there. We used to be able to do that because we recognised that real authority makes space for other authority. Real power is secure enough in itself that it allows other power to sit alongside it. It's actually weakness that can't broach any other power and uses its slight advantage to crush and destroy and push out all other perspectives. So anyway, there we go. I'll probably lose a load of viewers this morning and maybe gain a few, who knows. But anyway, it's been good to be here this morning. I've not really been venting spleen, but I have been trying to express something which has some emotion from my point of view in it. But I don't want to kind of be emotionally manipulative. I just want to make an appeal in how we do things. So anyway, hopefully we'll be in touch. You'll be back again tomorrow and we'll talk again. I'll just give you some last shots of the dogs. So as we walk up this way, let's turn it round. There we go. Banjo Luna. Dog's life is nice and simple. It's just what we're going to eat today, where are we going to go for a walk. Can you scratch my back? Wonderful. It's the way creation should be. Okay, see you then. Bye bye.